The West's involvement in Africa has always been controversial, but what if there's more to the story than we're being told? Behind the aid programs and diplomatic partnerships, is there a hidden war being waged, one aimed at exploiting Africa's resources and influence? Today, we're uncovering the truth about the West's hidden war in Africa. By the end of this video, you'll understand how Western powers operate in Africa, the methods they use to maintain control, and what this means for the future of the continent. This is about more than politics, it's about power and survival. Let's start with foreign aid. Western countries like the United States, the UK, and France provide billions in development aid to Africa every year. On the surface, this seems like goodwill, building schools, providing healthcare, and supporting governments. But aid often comes with strings attached, giving Western powers significant leverage. For example, aid is frequently tied to political reforms, economic policies, or trade agreements that favor Western corporations. Some African leaders argue this makes their countries dependent on the West, while critics say it's a form of neocolonialism disguised as charity. Then there's the military presence. The US operates AFRICOM, a military command focused on Africa, with bases and operations across the continent. Officially, it's about fighting terrorism and ensuring security. But many believe it's also about protecting American interests, particularly access to critical resources like oil and minerals. France has an even deeper military footprint in Africa, with troops stationed in former colonies like Mali, Chad, and Niger. While these missions are framed as peacekeeping efforts, they often align with France's economic and political interests, such as securing access to uranium for its nuclear power plants. Western corporations are another key player in this hidden war. From mining to agriculture, multinational companies dominate many sectors of Africa's economy. They extract resources like gold, diamonds, and oil, often leaving local communities with little to show for it. For example, in Nigeria, oil giants like Shell and Chevron have made billions, while local communities in the Niger Delta deal with oil spills, polluted waters, and health crises. The same pattern repeats across Africa. Foreign corporations profit, while the environmental and social costs are borne by Africans. Trade agreements also play a role. Many African countries are locked into deals that prioritize raw material exports over local industrialization. Europe, for instance, benefits from importing African raw materials at low prices while selling back expensive finished goods. This trade imbalance keeps African economies dependent and unable to compete globally. Let's talk about debt. Many African nations borrow heavily from Western financial institutions like the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund (IMF). While these loans fund development projects, they often come with strict conditions like cutting public spending or privatizing state-owned enterprises. These policies can weaken local economies and increase poverty. Here's an example. Zambia, one of the world's largest copper producers, has struggled under a massive debt burden. Western financial institutions pushed for privatization, which allowed foreign companies to take control of Zambia's copper mines. While these companies made huge profits, Zambians saw little improvement in their standard of living. Meanwhile, Western media often portrays Africa as a continent in crisis filled with poverty, corruption, and conflict. This narrative reinforces the idea that Africa needs Western help, justifying intervention while ignoring the role of foreign powers in creating or worsening these problems. But Africa isn't sitting back. Many countries are pushing back against Western control. For example, Ghana has begun renegotiating mining contracts to ensure more revenue stays within the country. Similarly, Ethiopia has rejected some Western aid packages that come with conditions, opting for alternative partnerships instead. Regional organizations like the African Union are also stepping up, advocating for greater collaboration among African nations. By working together, African leaders hope to reduce reliance on Western powers and negotiate better deals. At the same time, global competition is heating up. The rise of China in Africa has created new opportunities for African nations to diversify their partnerships. While this has raised concerns about Chinese influence, it also gives Africa more leverage in dealing with the West. The West's hidden war in Africa isn't just about economics, it's also about geopolitics. Africa's 54 nations hold significant voting power at the United Nations, making it a key battleground for global influence. Western nations work hard to secure African alliances, often through aid, trade deals, or military support. The stakes are even higher now as the world shifts toward renewable energy. Africa is rich in resources like cobalt, lithium, and rare earth metals, materials essential for batteries, solar panels, and electric cars. The race to secure these resources has only intensified the competition between Western powers, China, and other players. But the big question remains, is the West helping Africa or exploiting it? While Western investments bring infrastructure and development, they often come at a high-cost debt, dependency, and lost sovereignty. Africa's future depends on how its leaders navigate these challenges. By building strong institutions, investing in education and innovation, and leveraging global competition, Africa can turn this hidden war into an opportunity for growth. What do you think? Is the West a partner or an exploiter in Africa's story? Let us know in the comments below. And if you found this video insightful, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon to stay updated with Noble Black News channel for more in-depth stories about the forces shaping our world. China's influence in Africa is growing every day, but it's not through traditional warfare. Instead, it's a silent war, one fought with money, infrastructure, and diplomacy. Today, we're revealing how China is quietly conquering Africa's heart and reshaping the continent's future. By the end of this video, you'll understand the strategies China is using, the impact on Africa's development, and why this silent war is a game changer for the entire world. Let's start with the most visible part of China's strategy: infrastructure. Over the past decades, China has funded and built thousands of projects across Africa: railways, highways, ports, and airports. From the Nairobi-Mombasa Railway in Kenya to Ethiopia's electrified railway connecting Addis Ababa to Djibouti, these projects are transforming the continent. But this isn't charity. These projects are part of China's Belt and Road Initiative, a global plan to connect markets and resources back to China. Africa's resources like oil, cobalt, and copper are critical for China's economic growth, and these infrastructure investments ensure a steady flow of those resources. Here's the catch: many of these projects are funded through loans. Countries like Angola, Zambia, and Kenya have borrowed billions from Chinese banks to finance development. While these loans provide much-needed capital, they come with risks. If a country can't repay, China often takes control of key assets. Take Sri Lanka as an example. After defaulting on a Chinese loan, the country had to lease its strategic Hombonshota port to China for 99 years. In Africa, similar concerns are growing. In Zambia, reports suggest that Chinese entities could take over key infrastructure, including the National Electricity Company, if debts go unpaid. But China's silent war isn't just about infrastructure, it's also about trade. China is now Africa's largest trading partner, with two-way trade surpassing $250 billion annually. Africa exports raw materials to China like oil, minerals, and timber, while importing finished goods like machinery and electronics. This trade imbalance raises concerns. While China benefits from Africa's resources, African nations struggle to develop local industries. For example, countries exporting raw cocoa or raw oil often rely on foreign companies to process these resources, missing out on the most lucrative parts of the supply chain. China's influence also extends to technology. Chinese companies like Huawei and ZTE are building Africa's digital infrastructure, from mobile networks to smart cities. While this technology boosts connectivity, it also raises questions about surveillance and data security. Critics worrying that these systems could give China access to sensitive information. And then there's diplomacy. China has established strong relationships with African leaders through forums like the Forum on China-Africa Cooperation, FOCAC. At these events, China promises billions in investments, debt relief, and development projects. These gestures build goodwill and strengthen China's political influence across the continent. What does this all mean for Africa? On one hand, China's investments are driving much-needed development. Roads, railways, and power plants are critical for economic growth. And unlike Western aid, which often comes with conditions like democratic reforms, China's approach is more flexible and faster. But there are significant downsides. The heavy reliance on Chinese loans could lead to debt crises, where countries lose control over their own assets. The dominance of Chinese companies in key sectors could stifle local businesses. And the trade imbalance means African economies remain dependent on exporting raw materials. Critics argue that this silent war is creating a new form of colonialism, one where economic dependency replaces direct rule. While African leaders welcome the benefits of Chinese investment, many are starting to push back. Countries like Ghana and Tanzania are renegotiating contracts to secure better deals and protect their sovereignty. At the same time, China's growing influence is creating tensions with other global powers. The US and Europe are increasingly concerned about losing their foothold in Africa. Initiatives like the G7's Build Back Better World aim to counter China's Belt and Road Initiative by offering African nations alternative funding for infrastructure. Africa itself holds the key to its future. By diversifying partnerships and strengthening regional cooperation, African nations can reduce their dependency on any single foreign power. Organizations like the African Union are working toward this goal, advocating for greater economic integration and shared development. Still, the stakes are enormous. Africa's young population, abundant resources, and strategic location make it a central player in the 21st century. Whoever wins this silent war will shape the future of global power. So, what do you think? Is China helping Africa develop, or is it quietly taking control? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you found this video insightful, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon to stay updated with Noble Black News channel for more stories about the forces shaping our world.